The fire has been burning for 6 hours, and still it is not enough to fully push back what waits outside. Beyond the earthen walls, the wind drives ice crystals sideways across a landscape so hostile that bare skin freezes in the time it takes to speak a sentence. Inside, a family sleeps. Children lie sprawled across raised wooden platforms, buried in wool and fur, and if you watch closely you can see it, the faint ghost of breath rising from a sleeping child, made visible even here, even indoors, even with the flames alive at the centre of the room. That single detail tells you everything. The cold has not been defeated. It has only been held at arm's length. The temperature inside settles at 12 degrees above zero. Not warm, not comfortable, but alive. And between that 12 and the 30 below outside lies one of the most quietly sophisticated thermal achievements in all of human history, a building made from grass, earth, and timber that, by every intuition we have, should have no right to hold warmth at all. Yet it does, night after night, through a winter that stretches from September into the long dark of March. And here is the strange thing, the thing worth staying for, the very feature that should have made this house impossible to heat, is the same feature that ended up keeping these people alive. That contradiction sits at the heart of everything you are about to understand, because this is not a story about raiders or longships or plunder. This is the story of a machine, a survival machine disguised as a mound of dirt, and of the people who built it, not to conquer the winter, but to strike a bargain with it. To understand how it worked, we have to begin with the moment it almost didn't exist at all. To understand that moment, we have to go back to the 9th century, when the Norse first pushed westward out of Scandinavia and set foot on the shores of Iceland. They did not arrive as helpless wanderers. They came carrying centuries of hard-won knowledge about cold, about fire, about fur, about the slow and stubborn way that heat moves through timber and turf and human bodies pressed close together in the dark. They knew winter the way a sailor knows the sea, and yet, almost immediately, the land handed them a problem that all their inherited wisdom could not solve. The forests they had always depended on were not there. What greeted them instead was thin birch scrub, low and brittle, nothing like the tall oak and pine that had framed the halls of their homeland. The single most important building material of their entire civilization was, on this island, effectively gone. Think about what that truly meant. These were people who knew exactly how to build a home, the shape of it, the joinery, the pitch of the roof, passed down through generations like a language spoken with the hands. And now, to survive, they had to forget it. They had to abandon the way their fathers and grandfathers had built and start again from nothing. That is the quiet tragedy buried underneath this story. The price of survival was letting go of who they had been. But the Norse did something remarkable. Instead of fighting the land for materials it refused to give, they turned and used the land itself. Beneath the Icelandic grass lay thick deposits of peat-dense, compressed plant matter thousands of years in the making. They cut it into blocks, stacked it into walls more than a metre thick, and layered sod over the top with the grass roots still living inside it. Those roots knit the blocks together until, within a single season, the walls became indistinguishable from the hillside around them. From a distance, the finished house looked less like a building and more like the earth itself had been folded upward and given a single door. And this is where the real genius begins to reveal itself, because those walls were doing far more than simply blocking the wind. The physics behind turf and peat is not complicated, but it is profound. Dense materials absorb heat slowly, and they release it even more slowly. A turf wall a full metre thick does not react to the outside world in real time. When the temperature plunges outside, the wall does not surrender, it buffers, it holds. The same wall that quietly soaked up the warmth of the evening fire will still be releasing that stored heat at 3 o'clock in the morning, the exact hour when the flames have burned down to embers and the wind outside has sharpened to its cruelest edge. Modern engineers have a name for this. They call it thermal mass. The Norse had no such term. They simply knew through generations of watching and building that walls of earth made the cold more survivable than walls of wood ever could, and they pushed the idea further still. Wherever the terrain allowed, they sank the house directly into the hillside. Below the frost line, the ground holds a steady temperature all year round, indifferent to the storms raging above it. By building into that stable earth, the Longhouse tapped a reservoir of warmth as old as the planet itself. The wind could not scour walls it could not reach. The frozen ground could not steal heat upward through a floor already resting on warmer earth. The house did not fight the land. It leaned into it the way a child leans into a parent, and let the land carry part of the weight. Inside, that same understanding shaped where people slept. Raised wooden platforms ran the length of the walls, lifting bodies 1/2 meter to 1.5 meters above the floor. This mattered more than it sounds, because cold air is heavier than warm air. It sinks. It pulls along the ground like invisible water. The platforms lifted every sleeping person up out of that frigid layer and into a warmer band of air above it. Experimental archaeology in reconstructed longhouses has confirmed the gap precisely, and it was not a small one. It was the difference between sleep and a cold so relentless it will not let you sleep at all. But warm walls and raised beds were still not enough on their own, and the Norse knew it. So they did something that seems almost unthinkable to us now. They sealed the house almost completely shut. There were no windows. A window, after all, is a kind of wound, a hole punched straight through the insulating skin of a building, through which precious heat bleeds away without end. The only openings were narrow slots near the peak of the roof, sized just large enough to let smoke escape without letting the warmth escape alongside it. The Norse called these openings vindauga, literally wind-eye. And if that word sounds strangely familiar, it should, because it is the very root from which our English word window grew. Down the centre of the house ran the long fire, the lang elder, a continuous channel of flame with iron and soapstone pots suspended above it. It gave heat, it cooked the food, it pushed back the darkness. And here is where the fire alone should have been the whole story, except it couldn't be. Studies of reconstructed Icelandic longhouses found that keeping one going demanded more than 50 kilograms of wood every single day, and that was in summer alone. Stretch that across a full Icelandic winter, and the fragile timber economy of the island simply collapses. The fire, for all its comfort, could never be the answer, so the Norse built a second answer directly into the far end of the house. Through the coldest months, their cattle, their sheep, their horses were brought indoors and housed beneath the very same roof. This was no act of desperation, it was engineering. A single cow throws off a remarkable amount of heat simply by being alive, and a small herd generates enough warmth to be felt across an entire room. Warmth that costs nothing, consumes no firewood, and never goes out. It was a biological furnace running quietly in parallel with the fire, each one covering for the other's weakness. Even the smoke obeyed a hidden order, gathering in a dark layer high beneath the roof, while the people lived and slept in the warmer, breathable band trapped between the fire above and the deep earth all around. And yet, for all this ingenuity, the thing that truly kept these people alive was not only the physics. For the Norse, the fire at the centre of the home was never only a source of heat. It reached down into the deepest layer of how they understood the world itself. In their vision of creation, everything that exists was born from a single violent meeting, the collision of primordial fire and primordial ice, warmth and cold, crashing together to give shape to all things. And so the hearth burning in the middle of the longhouse was something more than practical. It was a small reenactment of that first act of creation, a single controlled flame holding the frozen void of the outer dark at arm's length, night after night after night. The house itself was sacred in the same way. When the earliest settlers approached this new land, many carried the carved wooden pillars of their ancestors and cast them into the sea, vowing to build their home wherever the waves chose to carry them ashore. The ground where those pillars landed was not merely chosen, it was consecrated. This, in the end, is what makes the Longhouse so quietly profound. It survived not because any single feature was brilliant, but because nothing stood alone. The turf walls held the heat. The buried earth lent its warmth. The raised platforms lifted the sleeping above the cold. The animals gave their bodies warmth for free. The fire cooked and glowed and endured. Remove any one of these, and the fragile margin between life and death collapses entirely. It was never a comfortable place, 12 degrees above zero, thick with smoke and the smell of animals, wrapped in a darkness that stretched from September deep into March. But comfort was never the point. The Longhouse was built to hold off death, and for centuries, on one of the harshest edges of the inhabited world, it did exactly that. The Vikings did not conquer the winter. They understood it deeply enough to build a machine that worked together with it, and that machine kept them alive.